The Himalayan peaks soared majestically above the Norbalinka Palace, exuding an air of calm serenity. But inside, the air was thick with tension. The young Dalai Lama sat quietly in his chamber, surrounded by concerned advisors. Outside, thousands of Tibetans had surrounded the palace, desperate to protect him from the Chinese forces amassing at the edge of the city. His most trusted advisors gathered before him, their faces pale with urgency. "Your Holiness, the Chinese army is preparing to strike. Their cannons are aimed at Lhasa. If you do not leave tonight, you may not leave at all." The words hung heavy in the chamber. He had known this moment was coming, but to abandon his people, to leave Tibet in the hands of those who sought to crush its spirit, it felt like betrayal. His mind went back to the moment when the monks had arrived at his home, carrying objects that belonged to his predecessor. "Which of these belong to you?" one of them had asked. Without hesitation, the child had reached for a prayer bead bracelet. The elder monk uttered what everyone else was thinking. "He is the one." From that moment, he had ceased to be Lhamo Thondup, the simple boy from a farming family. He had become the 14th Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet. Now, at 23, he carried the weight of that destiny on his shoulders. He was not just a man, he was the living embodiment of Tibet's soul. And now, he was in danger. If he stayed, he might be imprisoned or even killed. If he fled, he could preserve the Tibetan cause and continue the fight from afar. Then, distant thunder. No, it wasn't thunder. The Chinese had begun their initial bombardment of Lhasa. There was no more time to hesitate. His resolve hardened. "Prepare for the journey. We leave tonight." That night, the Dalai Lama hastily leaves his residence, disguising himself in a cloak before slipping into the back streets. There, he reunites with his family and fellow fugitives. A great challenge lies ahead, evading the heavily fortified Chinese perimeter. Moving quickly but cautiously, they suddenly stumble upon a Chinese artillery position, its soldiers alert and undoubtedly under orders to shoot on sight at this hour. They freeze, waiting in the darkness, but time is against them. If they linger too long, their absence at the palace may be discovered. Then fortune intervenes. Movement stirs among the soldiers, a changing of the guard. Seizing the fleeting opportunity, the cloaked fugitives hold their breath and slip past the unsuspecting guards, melting into the shadows and vanishing beyond the city. The Dalai Lama was headed for India, several hundred miles by foot, yak, and boat, through Chinese-occupied territory and across the mighty Himalayan mountains in winter. Their freedom and survival were by no means certain. Back in Lhasa, the situation in the Tibetan capital rapidly deteriorated. Chinese forces launched a full-scale crackdown, crushing the Tibetan resistance that had gathered around the palace to protect the Dalai Lama. On March 20th, 1959, the People's Liberation Army, PLA, began heavy bombardment of the city, targeting Tibetan rebels and civilians alike. Over the next few days, thousands of Tibetans were killed or arrested as the PLA tightened its control over Lhasa. The resistance was swiftly overwhelmed, and by March 23rd, Chinese forces had effectively secured the city. The Tibetan government was dissolved, and on March 28th, Beijing officially declared Tibet's so-called democratic reform, signaling the end of Tibet's traditional government and the consolidation of Chinese rule. With Chinese patrols scouring the countryside, the escape party moved only under the cover of darkness, seeking refuge by day. A single wrong turn could mean capture, or worse. Danger lurked everywhere. Spies roamed the villages, and a careless misstep could invite betrayal or ambush. At one point, a Chinese search party came dangerously close to their hidden location, threatening to uncover them and take them into custody. Just in time, they were warned by a friendly villager who had risked his life to help them. They made plans to change their course, sidestepping the search party and narrowly avoiding discovery. Meanwhile, Tibetan rebels, the Chushi Gangdruk, eager to help, waged diversionary skirmishes against Chinese forces, buying precious time for the Dalai Lama's escape. The Himalayas were merciless. Freezing temperatures, hunger, and exhaustion threatened to end the journey. The Dalai Lama, suffering from altitude sickness, nearly collapsed. Around this time, the Dalai Lama experienced a profound spiritual vision that filled him with reassurance. He reportedly saw a radiant light and felt an overwhelming sense of divine guidance, a sign that he would safely reach India. Then rumors surfaced that a Chinese informant had leaked their location. With the border just days away, their journey was once more in jeopardy. The most direct route was too risky. Despite the cold, the hunger, and extreme fatigue, they decided they would need to double back and take an alternate route. Had they stayed on their original path, they could have been intercepted just miles from freedom. Finally, the border. After more than 2 weeks of treacherous travel, the Dalai Lama and his entourage crossed into India, where Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru granted them asylum. Though physically exhausted, he remained spiritually steadfast, ready to begin a new chapter in exile. His escape was more than just a personal journey. It was a defining moment in Tibetan history. In the years that followed, thousands of Tibetans followed in his footsteps, seeking refuge beyond China's reach. Meanwhile, back in Tibet, the Chinese crackdown was swift and brutal, leading to mass arrests, executions, and the destruction of countless monasteries. By mid-April, from the safety of India, the Dalai Lama openly denounced China's occupation and established a government in exile in Dharamsala. His flight cemented Tibet's fate as a region under strict Chinese control, yet it also ignited a resistance movement that endures to this day. The Dalai Lama's daring escape remains one of the most extraordinary political getaways of the 20th century. Though living in exile, he continues his unwavering fight to preserve Tibetan culture and identity.